Hello Internet, AdoptedMike here, and in this video I'm going to be doing a build using the Rosewill Line ATX case. As you can see there, this one has blue LED fans in the front there. I just wanted to power that up to show which one that I've got from Rosewill. And the build that I'm doing here today is a customer upgrading, and essentially they're upgrading everything but the GPU. They didn't want to spend a lot of money, especially in the GPU side. They had a GTX 580 already that you can see there from Sparkle. So he wanted to reuse the GPU and then just upgrade everything else to some newer technology. We're coming from a Pentium 4 system, so a single core hyper-threaded Pentium 4. I want to say it was one of those Pentium 4, 3 gigahertz I think is what it was. So we're going to go to that, and then we're going to move into a multi-core processor, and we're just going to reuse that GPU and get, so basically we're having a new computer, old GPU, and then the idea would be to upgrade the GPU in the future. So anyway, we'll go on with the rest of the parts. We're going to be using for the motherboard the MSI A88X G43. And then with that, I'm going to be using an X4 760K Athlon processor without the graphics, basically the quad core without the graphics. We're going to be using the Gammaxx 200 by Deepcool to cool the processor. As you can see there, also one of his interests was Battlefield 4, which probably wouldn't have run very good on the other computer, so we're throwing in a copy of Battlefield 4 on this build as well too. We're going to have 8 gigabytes of team memory, those two blue sticks there, 4 gigabytes each of 1600 megahertz. I've got a 1 terabyte Seagate Barracuda hard drive to replace the 160 gigabyte drive that the guy had. We've got Windows 7 Home Premium, so that'll be an upgrade for him definitely as well too from Windows XP. And then we've got a DVD drive back here, DVD reader. And to power the whole thing, I'm going to be using the Antec Neo Eco 620 watt. So he's got a little bit of breathing room should he decide to upgrade the graphics card further. Although the 580 is a pretty it's a fairly power-hungry card anyway, so even moving up to a 600 or 700 series down the road, or even the 800 series down the road, he'll still have plenty of power for a single NVIDIA graphics card. No problem there whatsoever. So anyway, that kind of rounds out what I'm going to be working with for this particular build. Like I said, pretty much a brand new computer except for the video card, but hey, I do what the customer asks. So anyway, let's go ahead and get on with the build. So starting off with the case here, we can see I've obviously removed the panels, and we can see we've got some options for powering the fans, and we've got 4-pin and 3-pin options, which is kind of nice. And for the back, we've got just the one option, which is totally okay. And I'm not sure if it's supposed to be this way, but at the very least, mine came with an SSD mount here. It looks like I can mount two 2.5-inch SSDs with this included adapter, and then I also have a 5 1/4 to 3.5-inch adapter that's pre-installed as well too. So it's like I said, I don't know if that's an accident or if that's how they come. I didn't realize I was going to be getting the added value here of these, but they're easily removed anyway if you don't need them. But I just thought that that actually was pretty cool. So let's get around anyway. We'll take a look at the front panel. We've got a kind of a little light mesh there that is not removable, but it could be kind of vacuumed and cleaned out. It's not a great dust filter, but it would keep bigger items such as like hair and stuff like that out. We've got the USB 3.0 front panel header. We've got a USB 2.0 there. Then we've got our audio, which nowadays we don't need that AC97 anymore. So typically what I do there is I just clip that off and then just use the HD audio header only. And then we have our front panel, which are multicolored unfortunately, but we can work with that. Anyway, so let's take a look at the back side of the case anyway. And I kind of think that it's really cool because it's not just a complete open design here. We actually have little cutout type things to work with rather than some of the cheaper cases where they just have this whole block wide open. We actually have a little bit of options as far as hiding a few of the cables. There's definitely no room behind the motherboard tray whatsoever. Even though we have a CPU cutout here, definitely there is nothing else that can be done. There's just absolutely no room between that and the back panel. In fact, you can see here there's a pre-installed little piece of rubber here, probably to help keep some rattling down, because there's definitely no room there to work with whatsoever. And then even down here we have this little bitty cutout, and you could probably get a fan cable or something. I'm going to attempt to get like the USB or HD audio cable. I'm going to attempt to get that to actually fit down there. There is a little bit more room there, and you might be able to get a wire in there, but I don't think it's going to be this particular wire. But at any rate, you could probably get a fan cable to fit down in here. Yep, a fan cable will fit down in there if you position it correctly, and then you could run that and then pull off of a fan header should there be one at the bottom of your motherboard. Other than that, it might be a tight fit to get the HD audio, which would be the other logical idea, to put the HD audio. Of course, one thing you have to think about all the time too on a case like this, whatever you do to tie down these front panel cables, you have to remember you cannot remove this front panel if things are tied down too tight. So you always want to just keep a little bit of consideration there and allow some slack so that front panel can be removed should you need to remove it. But anyways, let's kind of look around the case. I guess we can take a peek at the back real quick though and see what we have here. We've got our PCI Express slots there. These are not screwed in, so when you remove them, you will pretty much throw them away, as they're ready to be bent and broken off of that. We've got a rear 120mm fan as well, some cable management holes there, or water cooling. We also have, I can see now, we have a little fan filter on the bottom, which isn't, I mean, it's okay. It just will kind of, there we go, actually kind of pop, there we go, kind of pops out. So not really a huge deal there, unfortunately, but I guess it does have a little bit of fan filtering capability for the power supply, as well as 4 pieces of rubber here that will help with some vibration. Overall though, it's a pretty thin tinned chassis, so keep that in consideration as well too. There is a decent amount of flex that I can do to this. It's all riveted in, so you can't remove anything, but yeah, you can see here it is flexing fairly easy, as well as the side panels were pretty flexible as well too. So that's just a few things to think about with this case, although for the price I don't think it's horrible. So anyway, I just wanted to point a few things out about that, and now I'm going to go ahead and get to working with the motherboard and getting it prepped to put in the case. So when I prep the motherboard, as I would say, I take it out of the bag and I just give it a real good look overall. I make sure, you know, everything is together, not broken. There's no bent pins on the fan headers or broken heat sinks. The rear I/O is fine. There's no missing pieces or anything broken off, stuff like that. The battery is in place, just some different things like that, fan headers, all that. So I just make sure that physically the board is okay, no capacitors missing, or something that would just pop right out in my mind and be like, oh, that's wrong. So after I get through that, then I like to set up my station here I've got my CPU that I'm going to be installing, I've got the RAM up here that I'm going to be installing as well too, and then whatever cooling solution that I'm using. And I have them both out because I was going to just point a few things out. I typically don't use stock coolers because they're just a little too loud and they're not nearly as effective in my opinion. So typically I try to talk the customer into an aftermarket cooler for those various reasons. Just a little bit cooler and a lot quieter operation. So that being said, there's actually nothing wrong with the stock cooling. It's just, not my favorite thing to use. So a lot of times what I'll do is, say for example, here we go, this is a 100-watt TDP processor, and then this this is, you know, sized for that. What I'll do is I'll actually save this, and then later on I can upgrade like a 65-watt TDP AMD processor with this, because the other, like the dual core ones, they're a smaller heatsink in general. So I believe it's the same fan, but it's a smaller heatsink. So I'll hold on to this in case I have a dual core build, which nowadays is becoming definitely less and less. So I just wanted to point that out. But then basically, so what you're gaining here as well too, I mean the fan is a little bit bigger obviously, but you're gaining heat pipes to help draw the heat away. You're gaining a lot more surface area to dissipate that heat as well too. So the heat is drawn up through those copper pipes, and you can kind of see with the thermal paste there, it is a direct contact with the processor. So you get the heat out of the processor into those copper pipes, and then it dissipates out across all of those aluminum fins. So that's kind of the idea behind an aftermarket cooler, in case you didn't know. So it's just one of those things, like I said, I like to try to talk the customer into so we can get some better heat dissipation. And then from there, I will install the processor itself, and I'm sure most of you probably have seen this done before and are aware of the cautions or precautions as well of an AMD CPU, being that the pins are actually on the CPU, where in Intel the pins are actually in the socket. So it's just a little bit different kind of setup. So you just want to make sure that you have the processor going in the right way by the little gold deal there, lining it up, and then it should easily seat. Oh, actually, should do it this way. I'm upside down, so I'm shooting this and I'm like, wait a second, that's not right. There we go. I was actually had to think about my orientation there. So anyway, it fits in. I mean, it just goes in all by itself. You don't have to give it any force. It's a zero insertion force, and then you slide that back down and lock it, and then we have the CPU installed. And then from here, we're going to be going with the cooler. And for this particular build, we're going to mount it this way so the air blows across like so, and then it would blow to the fan that would be back here on the back side of the case. And each one of these has a little bit different of a setup, so you just have to, depending on the actual the CPU itself, or the mount itself. This particular one here actually is got me sort of confused, but I've just kind of figured it out there. It's kind of yeah, there we go. Got to get it mounted in the center, and then we secure the one side here, and then we come over to here and secure the other side. This one is a little more takes a little more force than I thought it would, and a little more kind of playing around to line it up. This is, some of them are screw type where they screw down. This one here, actually, I'm hitting the unfortunately I'm having some interference issues with the heatsink here, which is kind of a shame, but I may have to just work with it a little more to get it to snap into place. Yeah, the heatsink actually is not really allowing that to work quite well, so I'm probably gonna have to do this off camera to where I can actually get in a little closer instead of using the viewfinder. Sometimes the viewfinder isn't nearly as easy to work with. And so I was able to get in there, get a closer look, and I just realized that I didn't have this axis lined up correctly with the notch. So now we have our cooling solution installed, as you can see right there, and now we are ready to put the RAM in, which is something that's very easy to do. And it's going to depend, some people have a preference on where to install the RAM. I actually in this particular case, it's not going to matter much. I'm going to put them in the blue sockets, but depending on if you wanted to accent the blue or the black socket, you could put them, you know, in the other one. It's not a whole hell of a lot of difference. It's not in, as long as you use the same color of RAM socket, you will be in good shape. So it's just lining it up with the notch there, and then firmly pushing down, and then rinse and repeat for the second one. There you are. So depending on, like I said, what you are looking for, you could go either with the two of them in the black slots or the two of them in the blue slots. It really doesn't matter. Sometimes it also depends on too of how big the heatsink is, if it interferes or not with the RAM. So it may force you, a bigger heatsink may force you into using different RAM slots. And then if you were going to fill all four of them, it really wouldn't matter anyway. So at this point now, we would I'll plug the fan header in, and then the motherboard will be ready to go in the case. So now the next important thing to do is using the motherboard's screws, you know, standoff holes. You want to use that as a template to make sure that the standoffs are installed in the correct positions in the case. If you, for example, some ATX boards would have a standoff here. Now if your case has that standoff here and this particular one doesn't have it, as you can tell, you could short the motherboard just by having the standoff in the wrong location, which would actually be this particular screw hole here. So you just want to go through, double check, and make sure all of the standoffs that are installed are in the right areas for your particular design of board, whether it be micro ATX, ATX. ITX is the only one that doesn't vary, but micro ATX and ATX have different holes, and a lot of it will depend on also to the width of the board as well too. So just something to think about and to pay close attention. Also at this point now too, I've installed the rear I/O shield here, and I've also installed the optical drive, which you actually can't see anyway, but we're going to go ahead double checking that, and then I'm going to drop the motherboard into the case. So we just go like that and ease it in around all these wires. Then you line it up where the I/O would come through the rear. And then I'm having an issue lining it up actually. So you go down and double check and make sure. Sometimes the rear I/O, they don't have all the punch outs taken out, so that could be a factor. But I can also see too, I have an issue with this top mounted fan here, back right there. It's actually hitting one of the heat sinks on the motherboard, that top one. Let me see if I can get it out there. The one right up there. So that fan is actually going to have to be removed, unfortunately. This particular case, and you can see by right here with the headers up top, it doesn't allow enough room for fans to be mounted up here. So, well, depending on the motherboard as well too. A different motherboard without a heatsink on top would have no problem, but this particular motherboard won't fit in this case with that fan, so I'm going to need to remove that fan. And now with the fan removed, we should not have any issues. And there we are. So I can also, now I can take a look and I can make sure that I can see the standoffs in the motherboard holes. And now you can see I've got 3 left over up on the right here. So that would be for a longer or excuse me, a wider ATX motherboard would utilize those screws. So there's another example of how the ATX standard is a little different depending on the board manufacturer. So now I can go ahead and screw the motherboard in to secure it down. Alright, so when you're going to install the screws, I always recommend at least having a magnetic screwdriver. Makes the job a hell of a lot easier. I always like to make sure that I've got the right screw. Different standoffs could have different threads, and I always like to make sure that I have the right thread, so I'll just kind of do a test run. And oh yeah, see, that one fits perfectly. So now I know that that is the screw that I want, and I can continue on by putting all 6 screws in to secure the motherboard down. So now all of the motherboard screws are installed, and I've gone around and made sure they were all tight, and we are ready to continue on. And I am actually going to, they included this tool to remove or to install standoffs, so I'm just going to pull these standoffs that I'm not using out just to make it look a little better. If they were black, it wouldn't be so bad, but having that gold just kind of bothers me. The ones on the top, interestingly enough, are painted black, but I'm going to guess it's because that it is already, I mean, it's part of the case and can't be removed. Yeah, in fact, that standoff does not come out, so that is a pre-installed one that will not be removed, but at least I can get rid of the brass pieces out of this build. So now we've got the motherboard installed, and we're ready to start doing, I don't know, at this point I will probably start doing some of the pre-wiring and stuff like that, and then, you know, wiring the fans, front panel headers, USB ports, stuff like that. And then I will also install the hard drive as well too, and then we'll get all that stuff kind of out of the way and tidied up and get ready for the power supply, which is unfortunately is a non-modular power supply. So this is going to be a little trickier than a modular power supply build, but it's definitely something that will still for sure work. But anyway, I'll stop rambling and I'll get right on. So this particular board has all of its front panel headers on the bottom, which is fairly common. Sometimes you see the USB 3.0 in a different location, that being right here. We've got USB 2.0, we've got a front panel header for the power buttons and the LED activity lights and stuff like that. And we've also got some different ones here, like a COM port. Here's our front panel audio, and then we got a couple more USB 2.0s over down that way. So now we're just going to get to wiring it up, and for probably for the front, this is going to be typical for the front panel connectors. You're probably going to need to use the manual to make sure that you have the power reset and hard drive and power LED lights correct, because you don't want your reset button to power your computer on and off, so, or your power button to be your reset button. So you should double check with the manual, make sure that you have those installed correctly. So this is the particular diagram you're looking for. It'll be very similar to this. We've got our speaker there so we can see where the speaker goes, and then we have our front panel connectors there. So most motherboard manuals you're going to have this. Some may be not as nice as this, but somewhere it's got to have this to let you know how all this stuff gets lined out. So you just want to make sure that you have your orientation correct, and you can check that by number 10 here is no pin. So you just make sure that that matches what you have down on your motherboard, and then you're good to go as far as plugging those in. Everything else, like the USB, it cannot, or the USB 2.0 can't be installed incorrectly. The USB 3.0, they're pinned to where they can't be installed incorrectly, so that's kind of nice. But the front panel headers, obviously, they can kind of go any which way, so you just want to make sure those are correct. Otherwise, you could end up with some problems down the road, like I mentioned before. And here is the end result from that last little run, I guess you could call it. Other than some cable management, this guy is ready to go, and I probably won't even mess with the cable management until the end of the build, when we start messing with the power supply. So speaking of power supply, we're at the point now that we'll start installing that. Like I said before, this could be installed with the fan pulling in with that little dust filter, although I don't know if the customer that I'm selling it to is going to be using it on carpet, and I'm going to bet he is. So I'm going to install the fan facing upward, because on carpet this fan won't be able to pull any air in whatsoever, because this case sits too close to the ground. So it's something that you also want to think about depending on how you're going to mount your case or where you're going to mount the case. You always want to give consideration to that fan being able to breathe, even though being this is so close to the ground, it may not get a good breath of air anyway, even if it's on a desk. So for this particular one, long story short, I'm going to be installing it with the fan up. And you can see too, we have a ton of cables to mess with. Unfortunately, that's the downside to a non-modular power supply, but we are definitely going to work around that, and we'll tuck some cables up here in the front. There's really nowhere else to tuck the cables, so we'll just make that work in up there. And then one other thing I wanted to point out as well too is I removed all of the toolless drive bay plastic things. You know, I'm not a fan of those at all, especially on discs that move, like a hard drive or an optical drive. I think the vibration, I'd rather be screwed right to the case tight than risk having the drive be able to vibrate, and then it would just sound like crap, in my opinion. So typically I don't use those toolless ones unless they're better, and in this particular case I don't feel that they were good enough for what I wanted to do with it. So anyway, now I'm going to go ahead and install the power supply, and it's easy. I'm going to do it off camera this time, but you take this, you put it in there, and then you screw it to the back with the included screws with the power supply, and then with the magic of editing, the results are here. So we've got it installed, got this mess of cables ready to be routed. Obviously we won't use all of them, so I'll route what needs to be routed, and then I'm going to try to hide as best as I can, or tie down the cables that we don't need. One other thing to think about also too is, how are we going to power the fans? Are we going to use the 4-pin Molex, or are we going to use a 3-pin fan header? Particularly, I like to use the 3-pin fan header because it's a cleaner look, and we can do a lot of it's just easier to hide, and we can plug it right into a header on the motherboard. And some motherboards will even control the fan speed as well too, where this one here is just going to be kind of an ugly connector, and it's going to be all the time 12 volts. So just something else to think about, I'll just be clipping these down to here and not even worrying about having that Molex at all. So anyway, I'm going to go ahead and get on with the cable installation or plugins. So now here we are. I've got the cable actually run, and some of the cable management started as well too. The 8-pin, there's really not much of an option, so we have to run the 8-pin up and around to plug in there, being that there's really no other way to run it without being crazy. So that's the best that I was able to attain there. Everything else I kind of tied to the floor, like the Molex and the extra SATAs. The 24-pin, you can see, just routes behind there and then back up and into here, so it's kind of even concealed by where I chose to mount the hard drive, as well as the SATA connector. I have it going that way as well too, and then one popping out here for the hard drive power, the other one working up here, and then I had one lead left over that couldn't really do anything with, so I just kind of stuck it out of the way in there. And then I've got the SATA cables run as well too, and this did not come with it. I had to buy this optionally. You can usually get them for a couple of dollars, but I just wanted a shortened one, and I thought the blue really looked pretty sharp with the rest of the blues anyway. And then this SATA cable I stole out of the motherboard box itself. And then the only other thing I guess I forgot to mention, I did add a 3-pin Y splitter here. These can be had for $2 or $3. You may not be able to really tell that it's up there. Yeah, there you go, you can kind of see it. But I'm just taking one of these system fan headers and using a Y cable to power both of those fans there, and then I just have this back fan plugged into a motherboard header right up underneath here, kind of by the underneath this heatsink. There's the word I was looking for. So this is the cable management, as about as good as it's going to get before I install the GPU anyway. I've got these sitting off to the side, and when I put the GPU in, it could get a little, it's going to be difficult to hide these, unfortunately. Probably the only thing that's going to happen is these, well, I guess I don't need to explain myself. Why don't I just install the GPU and then I'll show you what I'm going for. So I've got the GPU in, and there's actually a few little modifications that I want to mention. First of all, I had to change this a little bit up here, the SATA cable. I had to run it to a different SATA port on the motherboard. You can't see it now, but there's a SATA port right behind the card. I was able to have a little bit more play, it just worked a lot better to have this using a different SATA connector, and then I don't have to stress the, this cable was getting stressed a lot by having the GPU pushing against it. So anyway, the GPU is installed, as you can see. And other thing I wanted to point out too, this case did come with two what do you call it, brackets, I guess. So I broke out a couple of the bend off ones, and I used a bracket here and a bracket here, and my hopes for that was to possibly, well, more than likely what it'll do is it's going to create a little bit more rigidity on this rear I/O part of the chassis, so that card is a little bit more secure, and we shouldn't have any kind of twisting or bending issues with the additional weight, especially when like transporting the case. So anyway, now probably I'm going to work on, not probably, I'm going to work on this, and I'm going to try to tuck the cables in back here and then have them kind of come out right to here and plug in so we can hide these as best as possible. And now here we are with the video card wiring, or power, plugged in, and I have it kind of wrapped around and tied to the side there. Easier to show than it is to explain, but you can kind of get the idea of what I did there. So it's cable managed at this point. Probably about as good as it gets. Although this isn't horrible, it would be better with a modular or semi-modular power supply. But I actually think that this turned out better than I expected originally, so I feel pretty good about that. Hard drive mounting location up here. It also could be mounted down here depending on what you wanted to do. I just happen to want it there this time. No particular reason. We do got a couple of fans blowing across, so at least it'll help move the hot air out, and the GPU has got plenty of room to breathe. So I think that is actually quite awesome with this case. Got plenty of room to work with. It's definitely a pretty good budget case in my opinion. Now let's take a look at the back side. I can show the cable management there. And that's how this ended up. Obviously, like I said before, nothing fits on this side, but we were able to, I can still close the lid with the two fan headers here. Not much thicker would actually fit up in this particular area, but I will be able to close the lid. Everything else kind of sort of fit back here. Left some extra slack in case we do need to remove that front panel. Shouldn't be too much of a problem there anyway, although it isn't going to be the most ideal to be taking it on and off, so that's something to consider. I didn't end up utilizing the little cutout there. It just really, nothing was going to work. I don't see why there is a cutout there, honestly I don't, but maybe there is a way to utilize it. In this particular build I just could not find a clever way to do it. But anyway, I'm going to throw these side panels back on, and then I will get to my conclusion. So in conclusion, all things considered, I think this case is actually a pretty good value. It was around $50, like I said before, which isn't horrible for an ATX case. It's kind of thin, it's kind of chintzy, yeah. But at that price point, and you have to also consider it did include 4 fans. I mean, although we couldn't use the ones on the top because of the just wasn't enough room with clearance for the motherboard. On one side we were hitting the processor VRM cooling heatsink. The other side we definitely hit that anyway, and possibly the RAM as well too. So for cooling fans on the top, you're probably going to find that you can't use it, so just something to think about. However, that fan could be pulled off the top and put into here. There is plenty of room for this lower portion to have an intake fan. With a tower style heatsink, you wouldn't be able to put one up here, but it is something to think about for use of that fan. I opted not to use it, and just to credit the customer back $5, because with the blower style GPU, I didn't feel that we needed to put any more air here as much as it needs to be here for the intake. But anyway, I think we're not going to have an airflow problem, so we're cool there. A couple other things to mention about this case. We've got plenty of connectivity up front, and I do like this reset button that's hard to push, so you really wouldn't have an issue hitting it by accident. So I think that is really good. I mean, other than that, it's a clean case. It looks good, although, you know, just the thin metal, you know, so it is kind of lightweight, and it was kind of, you know, kind of chintzy to build in, but not horrible. And when everything is installed and tied together, it gives the case quite a bit more rigidity anyway. So here's a look at the back. You can see how that turned out. So anyway, yeah, I mean, I don't see why I would not recommend this case, especially if you were to get it with a rebate or something like that. I've seen it as low as $35, and at $35 I think it's a heck of a steal. Even at full price of $50, it's not horrible, and I think I have seen it as high as $60 in some places. I probably wouldn't pay $60. I'd probably feel more comfortable paying around $40 for this case, but that's my particular opinion. That's something you guys would have to decide. But anyway, I hope this video helps somebody out, or multiple people out hopefully, to decide if this is the case for them, or if they want to do a build in this case. So if I helped you out and you liked the video, go ahead and hit the thumbs up for me, so I know that I, you know, did a good thing here. And in the comment section below, tell me what you think about this case, or if you've used it, or just any general constructive criticism would be appreciated as well. And as always, thank you for watching.